Since the Mail and Guardian published a story last year that pegged the price of the 6 new nuclear reactors that South Africa plans to build at 1 trillion rand, there's been a lot of debate and controversy about that figure. So immediately after that article, the Department of Energy came out and said, no way, it's likely to be way less than that. A few weeks later, the energy minister speaking to the media in France came out and said it's going to be 1 trillion or more likely. And then later on at the COP17 climate change conference in Durban, she said, no, it'll be about 400 billion rand. There are all these competing figures out there. So what I did for my story in the newspaper last week was to ask 3 nuclear economics experts to cost energy projects. And I think from the point of view of coming to a definitive figure, this is how much South Africa's nuclear build will cost, it kind of failed. Because what my 3 experts came to was a range of prices between about 320 billion right up to an excess of 1 trillion. Nuclear costs are difficult to predict. Different people will roll in different factors in coming to their calculations. And when we're starting to talk in the realm of billions of rands, 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion rand either way doesn't sound a lot. But you then break that down to comparative levels. The biggest ever tender issued in South Africa, the arms deal, about 60 billion. And here we're talking hundreds of billions. It's a real risk that South Africa is taking on here financially with this contract. The cost of construction is fairly easy to ascertain and to work out. What's going to be difficult is the cost of the financing. So because these are long-term projects, South Africa is going to have to borrow money over that period to fund what is being built. And we don't know how much it's going to cost to finance the build program at this stage. But going with sort of market rates and even fairly conservative market rates, the cost of financing would be between 40 and 60% of the cost of building it. That's significant additional cost. The longer a project goes on, your borrowing begins to climb, your cost of borrowing, because it's a percentage that you borrow, and that can quickly accumulate and rapidly run out of control. So the one expert that I spoke to, Professor Stephen Thomas, said, look, the reactors that the French have been building, they've run into tremendous time and cost overruns. What if that were to happen in South Africa? What if we were to go 100% over budget and double the time to build this thing? And that's when the finance starts to mount significantly. Because whereas you'd budgeted to borrow at a certain rate, suddenly now you're having to borrow from the open market at higher rates of interest. It becomes very, very difficult. The great thing about nuclear is that it pumps out a lot of electricity. So actually the cost per unit of electricity generated is very competitive when compared with coal power. And certainly the 2 biggest renewables, wind and solar, cost quite a bit more per unit of electricity generated. But what one of the other experts that I spoke to, Rod Gajinski, said was that nuclear takes 10-15 years to build. In that time, the cost of renewables is going to come down. So to say today that renewable energy costs more per unit of electricity than nuclear is not the full story. Because in 10-15 years' time, when the nuclear stations start generating their first power, we might find that wind and solar electricity power has developed over those 10-15 years to the stage that it's now competitive. And yet we've ploughed all this money and all this expense into building nuclear.